The midnight sun bore down on Asaba City, its rays casting playful shadows on the walls of Starlight Academy. The school buzzed with its usual energy, the laughter of students during long breaks and the faint whistle of the janitor sweeping the schoolyard. But in the corner of the teacher's staff room, an entirely different kind of activity was unfolding. Deborah, or Debby, as everyone called her, crouched low behind the window of the staff room, her cell phone clutched tightly in her hand. She signaled for her two friends, Bisola and Zitel, to keep quiet. Zitel, the tallest of the trio, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, leaned forward to get a better view. Inside the room, Mr. Andrew, the handsome bachelor who teaches economics, known for his deep baritone voice and sharp suits, was locked in a passionate kiss with Miss Shola, the new biology teacher. Shola, an ebony-skinned beauty with curves that made heads turn, seemed hesitant, but Andrew's charm had clearly overpowered her resolve. "I told you we shouldn't do this here," Shola whispered, breaking the kiss and glancing nervously towards the door. Andrew smirked, his confidence unshaken. "Relax, Shola. Everyone is either teaching or out on a break." Shola sighed, shaking her head, but before she could respond, a faint noise echoed from the hallway. "Who is there?" Andrew backed, spinning towards the door. The three girls froze for a split second before running away, their laughter echoing through the corridors. By the time they reached an empty classroom, Debby doubled over, laughing so hard she could hardly breathe. "Did you see his face?" Zitel gasped, clutching her side. Bisola tried to catch her breath and said, "You guys are crazy. What if they caught us?" Debby straightened up, her face alive with excitement, and replied, "That's the whole point, BC. They didn't. And guess what?" Debby held up her phone, waving it triumphantly, and said, "We have got the whole romance on video." The room erupted in laughter again as they replayed the footage, their eyes gleaming with wicked delight. Word of the incident hadn't spread yet, but for Andrew and Shola, the paranoia was real. Sitting in the staff room later that day, Shola's face was a mask of worry. "We were seen, Andrew. I told you this would happen." Andrew placed a reassuring hand on hers. "We don't even know who it was. Could have been anyone. Let's not panic." But Shola wasn't convinced. Her instinct told her this was just the beginning of trouble. That evening, Andrew's phone buzzed with an anonymous text message. "I know what you did in the staff room." The message sent a chill down his spine. Before he could respond, a second text message followed. "Be careful, we are watching." Meanwhile, the three troublemakers were relaxing in Debby's lavish bedroom after school hours. Debby's parents were rich, and so was Bisola and Zitel's parents too. They were a bunch of spoilt girls from rich homes. "We have got them where we want them," Debby said, scrolling through her phone. "Let's make this fun." Bisola hesitated. "You don't think this is too much? I mean, blackmail is a serious crime." Debby rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, BC, they deserve it. You saw them acting like horny teenagers in our school staff room. It's disgusting." Zitel grinned, her mind already spinning with ideas, and she said, "Let's start small. Keep them on edge, then we make our big demands." The next morning, Mr. Andrew and Miss Shola both received the same message, a short clip of their stolen moments in the staff room. The text message read, "Do as we say, or this video goes viral. You have been warned." Subsequently, in one of Mr. Andrew's economic classes, Debby stood up, waving her phone in the air. "Mr. Andrew," she said sweetly, "how's your day going? You seem a little distracted." The class erupted in laughter, sensing an undercurrent of tension. Andrew's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Debby smirked and sat down, satisfied with her performance. After class, Debby, Zitel, and Bisola cornered Mr. Andrew in the empty hallway, and they said to him, "We want answers to the upcoming WAEC final exams," they demanded, their tone laced with arrogance. "You will get them for us, or else the video gets leaked." Andrew's face darkened. So these girls were the ones spying on him and Shola in the staff room. But before he could speak, Zitel chimed in. Oh, and don't forget Miss Shola, she can start grading us A's in the biology test. Debby leaned closer, her voice a mock whisper. Unless you would rather everyone sees the romance video. Defeated, Andrew nodded. Fine, fine, just don't release it. The girls laughed as they walked away, high on power. The coming weeks was a chaos for Andrew and Shola. In their classes, Debby and her friends made a mockery of them at every turn. The girls' antics didn't go unnoticed by the other students, who whispered among themselves as they wondered why a strict teacher like Mr. Andrew allowed Debby, Bisola and Zitel to misbehave in his class. During one of Miss Shola's biology lessons, the topic was reproductive system. Debby raised her hand, a sly smile on her lips. Miss Shola, can you explain how pregnancy happens? She asked, her voice dripping with mock innocence. I mean, like step by step. The class erupted in laughter. Miss Shola's face flushed as she stammered out a response. Pregnancy occurs when Debby interrupted, her tone deliberately suggestive. You mean after a hot sexual intercourse, right? Shola's composure cracked and she backed. Enough, Deborah. That's inappropriate. Oh, but it's biology, Debby replied, her eyes gleaming with mischief. We are just trying to learn. The laughter grew louder and Shola knew she was losing control. She glanced towards the door, praying for the school bell to save her. Debby and her friends, Bisola and Zitel, were on a high. The thrill of holding power over two of their most feared teachers electrified their every interaction. They roamed the school halls with an arrogance, basking in their newfound status as the untouchable trio. It wasn't long before they escalated their torment. The anonymous text messages became more explicit. Debby had crafted the perfect message. Dear Mr. Andrew, the staff room smells of secret and betrayal. Do as we say, or your reputation will rot like expired bread. Sweet dreams. The three girls huddled in Debby's room that afternoon, laughing uncontrollably. Zitel sprawled on the floor, caught her breath long enough to ask, what if they call off our bluff? Debby leaned forward, her eyes gleaming, and she replied, they won't. We have them exactly where we want them. Meanwhile, in the teacher's staff room, Mr. Andrew and Miss Shola were sitting, looking tensed up. Andrew's once confident demeanor was now in a panic. He avoided eye contact with his colleagues. Miss Shola, on the other hand, was falling apart. We can't keep letting them control us, she whispered to Andrew. This isn't just about our jobs, it's about our dignity. Andrew sighed heavily, his face buried in his hands, and he replied, do you think I don't know that? But if that video gets out, Shola cuts in, I can't do this anymore. We are playing into their hands. We need a plan. Andrew nodded reluctantly. He knew she was right, but their options seemed bleak. One afternoon, as the three girls lounged under a tree in the schoolyard, Debby shared her plan. Girls, I want to use the staff room. Bisola blinked in confusion and asked, for what? To spy on them again? Debby shook her head, her voice low and conspiratory, and she replied, no, for me and Kendrick, my boyfriend. Zitel gasped, Debby, you are insane. That's where the drama started. Why would you risk it? Debby smirked and replied, that's the thrill. I will have Mr. Andrew keep watch. He owes us. Bisola and Zitel exchanged uneasy glances, but they didn't dare question her further. The plan unfolded with chilling efficiency. Debby approached Mr. Andrew after school, her tone deceptively sweet. Sir, I need a favor. Mr. Andrew stiffened and asked, what is it now? She smiled, nothing too crazy. I want to make use of the staff room tomorrow with my boyfriend Kendrick. When all the other teachers have gone out, you will keep watch, won't you? Andrew's heart sank. The humiliation was unbearable. but he felt trapped. With no other choice, he nodded. For weeks, the secret rendezvous continued. Debby enjoyed her audacity as the thrill of having fun time with her boyfriend right there in the staff room, while Mr. Andrew stands outside to keep watch over them, was so exciting for her, and Kendrick was all too willing to go along with this. Meanwhile, Mr. Andrew stood guard outside the staff room, his humiliation compounding with each passing moment. But Andrew had reached his breaking point one day. He could no longer endure the disgrace, and a dangerous resolve took root. If the girls wanted to play dirty, he would beat them at their own game. Late one evening, after the school was deserted, Andrew installed a hidden camera in the staff room. His plan was simple: catch Debby in the act and use the evidence against her. The next time when Debby led Kendrick into the staff room, Andrew stood outside as usual to be on the lookout, but inside, the camera recorded everything. When the deed was done, Andrew retrieved the footage and marched to the principal's office. For the first time in weeks, he felt a savor of hope. In the principal's office, he confessed everything: the romance he had with Miss Shola, which he admitted was his fault, and the video blackmail from the three students, Debby, Zitel, and Bisola. The principal, Mrs. Akinwumi, watched the footage of Debby and Kendrick in silence, her expression hardening, and she said, "You have both disgraced this institution," she said coldly to Mr. Andrew. "But we will handle this delicately. Leave the rest to me." Andrew nodded, relief mingling with shame. He didn't care about his job anymore. He just wanted freedom from the nightmare. The principal knew that exposing the scandal outrightly would tarnish the school's reputation. Instead, she devised a cunning strategy to retrieve the blackmail video from the girls without them realizing they were being outsmarted. The principal, Mrs. Akinwumi, sat in her office, carefully preparing her plan. She knew the three girls were addicted to power and control, their beauty and family wealth, making them believe they were untouchable. But she also knew that pride always had a way of leading the most confident to their downfall. Her plan was simple, but brilliant. She called for a meeting with Debby and her friends. Debby, the ringleader, strutted into the principal's office with her usual air of superiority. They had no idea that Mrs. Akinwumi had already uncovered every detail of their blackmail scheme. "You three girls have been quite the troublemakers lately," Mrs. Akinwumi began, her voice measured but stern. "But I've been thinking, perhaps we could find a way to resolve this mess," the principal said with a serious tone. "A certain video, I believe, is in your possession that showed the incident that happened between Mr. Andrew and Miss Shola." The blood drained from Bisola's face, and Zitel's hand shot to her mouth, but Debby was still calm, and she said, "We don't know what you are talking about. We don't know of any video." Mrs. Akinwumi raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Oh, I think you do, and I think you'll be willing to hand it over when I tell you what will happen if you don't." Without waiting for a response, Mrs. Akinwumi pressed a button on her desk, and the TV in her office started showing video footage of Debby and Kendrick kissing passionately in the staff room. "You see," the principal continued and said, "I know you have been blackmailing Mr. Andrew and Miss Shola, and you even threatened to release the video you have of them if they don't help you cheat in the WAEC final exams. You girls have committed two big crimes. Number one, blackmailing someone is a big crime in Nigeria, and it has a jail sentence of over 10 years. Now, being minors, you might get lighter sentence. But what about cheating in exam? For a crime like that, it is 14 years jail term for any student involved in WAEC exam malpractice." Mrs. Akinwumi paused to make sure her words were making impact, and she continued and said, "Now I know you girls are smart, and the smartest thing for you to do now is to hand over the full video records and every copy you have of Mr. Andrew and Miss Shola right now, and I will not report you to the exam authorities. Neither will I push the blackmail case to the police, but be ready to face the other consequences of your stupid actions." The girls sat in stunned silence as the principal's words sank in. There was no escape. So they handed all the incriminating videos they had of Mr. Andrew and Miss Shola. And for the first time, they felt very afraid of what their parents would do when they get to know about their notorious activities in school. That same day, an emergency assembly was called. Students filed into the auditorium, murmuring among themselves, curious about the reason behind the unexpected assembly. The principal stood at the podium, her expression serious. Mrs. Akinwumi stood and called out the three girls to stand in front of the assembly. When the girls walked in, their heads bowed. It was clear that something had changed. They were no longer proud. They had been brought low by their own arrogance. Mrs. Akinwumi's voice rang out, clear and commanding, and she said, "Today we have gathered not just for a lesson about consequences for our actions, but in this world, nothing goes unnoticed. What you do in the shadows will always come to light." She paused, her eyes sweeping over the students, who were now listening intently. And Mrs. Akinwumi continued, "Debby, Zitel, and Bisola, your actions of deceit and manipulation ends here. Today, you are suspended indefinitely from this institution. You may think you are above the law, but the truth is, no one is above the law." The assembly was silent. Even the most rebellious students seemed stunned by the gravity of the principal's words. They did not know why the students were being suspended indefinitely. Even the teachers were confused. "And to the rest of you," Mrs. Akinwumi continued, "let this be a reminder that no matter how rich, how beautiful, or how powerful you think you are, there is always a price to pay for the choices you make. The road of integrity may not be the easiest, but it is the one that will carry you through the storm." Before the assembly ended, the principal also called out Kendrick and issued out the same punishment to him. With that, the assembly ended. Debby, Zitel, Bisola, and Kendrick were escorted out of the auditorium, their heads still bowed in shame. Later that day, the staff room felt emptier than ever. Mr. Andrew and Miss Shola sat silently, packing their belongings. The weight of their collective disgrace hung heavily in the air. Mrs. Akinwumi had relieved them of their jobs with immediate effect. The other teachers stood in the staff room, watching Mr. Andrew and Miss Shola packing all their teaching materials, and they were too afraid to ask why. As Andrew closed his desk drawer one final time, he looked up at Miss Shola. She was staring out of the window, her expression unreadable. Andrew's heart ached with the thought of everything they had been through. "Shola," he called out softly, his voice cracking. I don't know how I let it get this far." Shola turned to face him, her eyes soft with understanding, and she said, "We both made mistakes, Andrew, but we can't keep living in the past." Andrew swallowed, his throat dry. I know, but I can't imagine facing the future without you. I am sorry for everything I did. I was weak. I still am, but I want to try to be a better person." Shola's eyes filled with emotion, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then in one moment of pure vulnerability, Andrew dropped to one knee, his face flushed with determination, and he asked, "Shola, will you marry me? Not just because of the mistakes we made, but because I want to make things right. I am truly in love with you." The other teachers in the staff room were watching the scene with their mouths wide open. Tears welled up in Shola's eyes as she nodded, a smile breaking through the storms of emotion. And she said, "Yes, Andrew, yes." As they embraced, the school teachers burst into cheers and they clapped happily for the couple. As Andrew and Shola walked into the sunlight horizon, they looked fulfilled together, even though they were jobless at the moment. But deep inside their hearts is the promise of a brighter tomorrow where love and dreams would lead the way.